As AI is entering a new phase, we are moving beyond simple prompt and response LLMs towards systems that can autonomously act, coordinate tasks, and make decisions. And now, the Linux Foundation has announced the Agentic Artificial Intelligence Foundation, a major step towards standardizing the technologies that will power this new era, including MCP, Goose, and agents.md. To break down what this means for enterprises in the broader open source AI ecosystem, I'm joined by once again Randy Bias, VP of Technology and Strategy at Mirantis. Randy, as you saw the news, Linux Foundation just announced the Agentic Artificial Intelligence Foundation. From your perspective, how significant is this move, and what was your initial reaction when you heard the news?
Mirantis is very excited about this new foundation. We think it creates a lot of opportunity and a way to create a new ecosystem around MCP, Model Context Protocol, that will be game changing. For me, when I look at it, I recollect how things were with OpenStack. And prior to OpenStack, there were a number of different options for doing infrastructure as a service that were open source, including Eucalyptus, Cloud Stack, and OpenNebula, but none of them really had kind of that intent to create a community and an ecosystem and to go beyond the code, because most people who are in open source understand that it's less about the code and it's more about the community, it's more about the people, it's more about the ecosystem. And so when OpenStack originally launched, it was a community first effort. And then a couple of years later, when they formed the foundation, again, it was community first. And so I see this as Anthropic, along with OpenAI, because they're one of the others in there, making an announcement, really trying to cement MCP as kind of the one of the main pillars of agentic AI. And this is a very shrewd move on their part to effectively suck the oxygen out of the room, kind of as OpenStack did with those other open source infrastructure as a service plays before. OpenStack comes out, CloudStack goes away. They sell to Citrix, Eucalyptus goes away, OpenNebula never gets any traction. And so I think this is a very shrewd move. It's going to cement Model Context Protocol as the de facto agent to agent and agent to tool protocol. And I think that it's going to be very, very interesting going forward. I think that we're going to see an ecosystem form. I think that we're going to see a lot of people come to the party. And I think that we're going to see a rapid pace of innovation, even more rapid than we've seen to date, not just from Anthropic, but because there'll be others around the table who are going to build on top of MCP and use it as a de facto standard.
In the consumer space, most conversation is still centered on LLMs, but in the enterprise, the focus has already shifted towards agentic AI. Can you talk about why is agentic AI the natural evolution beyond traditional LLMs, and how does this new foundation influence the broader MCP-driven ecosystem?
So we have our own kind of agentic maturity model that we use internally to kind of sort of think about where we are and where our customers are kind of on in the life cycle. And, you know, by all of our assessments, looking at our current customer base, engaging with new customers, we're very, very, very early on in AI. I think everybody knows that. But where everybody is right now is they're kind of at the basic kind of usage of frontier models. Maybe they've got RAG and some chat bots, but you know, none of that is enough to give a given business, you know, a competitive advantage in the vertical that they're in. This is really the next set of services, the next set of deployed AI services that will create value are going to be ones that are attached to mission critical, competitive business data that people have. So if you're a healthcare business, it's going to be connected to electronic healthcare records and data that you don't necessarily want to send outside your four walls. If you're a financial services business, it's going to be the same thing. There's no way that high frequency trading platforms are taking their algorithms and basically shoving them out to any of the frontier models. They just aren't going to trust that that's a safe thing to do. So this next place that we're going to go as a group is basically figuring out how to deploy agents on-prem connected to high highly sensitive data and connecting them to LLMs that are running on-prem, probably open source LLMs, because those are getting better and better and better. And that's where the huge value is going to come, where you're going to get competitive advantage against your rivals, right? Because the reality is that it's going to be the first movers who adopt AI internally, adopt agentic workflows internally, and apply it with their specific data for their context, their business, the data that's very specific to what they are trying to accomplish, and get that leverage. And those who do that first will be the ones that win, and those who do it last will be the ones that are impacted.
The foundation is initially launching with MCP, Goose, and agents.md. How do these technologies complement each other and form the foundation for an open, interoperable agentic AI ecosystem?
Yeah, well, frankly, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more. I would have liked to have seen the OpenAI Agents SDK. I would have liked to have seen the Cloud SDK. I would have liked to see a little bit more lean in. I would have liked to seen kind of more going all in on this. I don't see any reason for them to be holding those pieces back. But it shows that they have an intent, and we'll see where this goes. It's important to remember that a lot of the times these foundations, they new ones, they start off with a few pieces, and then they gather steam over time. So I don't worry too much about it. It is interesting that we've got a protocol, a desktop app, and a markdown file, and that's an odd combination, I'll be honest, but it shows an intent to basically do the right thing, which is to drive standardization through winning, and that's the big thing. One what Anthropic did that I, really appreciate a lot is that they came out hard and they launched MCP. They got immediate traction, and people said, "Hey, there's no authentication. We've got security concerns, et cetera, et cetera." Bam, a few months later, they dropped authentication and put in the basics for security. There's no registry. We've got concerns about that. Bam, there's a registry a few months later, right? And then you can see kind of the writing on the wall. They're talking now about MCP servers basically handling code and being able to run code. So it won't be just tool calling. So, they're doing the right thing in terms of rapid iteration, listening to customers, using it themselves, understanding what works and what doesn't work. And the reality is that even though people talk about AI native right now, AI native isn't defined in the way that cloud native is. So we don't actually know what AI native is. It's far too early. Everybody's using it as a marketing term. They're trying to attach it to cloud native, but the patterns aren't there. We're discovering the patterns now. It's going to be this next generation of agents that are deployed inside the enterprise, and all the learning we do about that and around that, that's going to ultimately define AI native. But it seems pretty clear to me that model context protocol will be right in the thick of that. And as long as Anthropic continues to be flexible and thoughtful and rapidly iterating, and welcomes an ecosystem of people around it through the foundation, I think we've got a bright future ahead. So we'll do all the learning together. Some things will work, some things won't. But eventually we'll come to some general rough consensus in running code.
When you look at the enterprise AI landscape today, what challenges stand out the most, and which of those pain points do you see this foundation is going to help address?
One of the things, again, going back to the first, my first kind of point of sucking the oxygen out of the room, is that when people are coming to agentic and they're trying to understand what they're going to do in terms of agent to tool, agent to agent protocols, um, it's less about what is the best technology, what has been best implemented, and it's more about what gets the most momentum around it. So by putting it in a foundation, by kind of beating Google to the punch, they have an opportunity to kind of get out in front and make MCP a de facto standard. And that's one of the pain points. It's like enterprises who are engaging on a new journey in agents, agentic AI, they want to know where to start, and they want to know where to start with confidence, and they don't want to, they want to de-risk the whole process. They already know that there's a lot of risk because, you're at the bleeding edge. They know that AI itself carries lots of risk. They know that connecting to agents in their very specialized data brings a lot of risks. So how do you de-risk it? You hopefully go to a place where there are many other folks around the table, where you're all going to learn together, where there's sort of a level playing field, where kind of everybody can collaborate. And that's really what the Linux Foundation does with so many of its foundations. So I think that's one of the biggest things, is to sort of de-risk that. Also, if we look at AI in general, and this is a critique across the entire ecosystem, is that even though there doesn't seem to be much of a moat, especially around the LLMs, there's still an attempt to sort of capture, like to do market capture. And, if there's one place where enterprises are going to feel uncomfortable with that, it's around agentic AI. They're going to want to basically run their agents inside their enterprise connected to their own, specific data, and they're going to want the ability to use that LLM or that LLM or that LLM to partner with Microsoft if they've got a strong relationship there, with Google if they've got a strong relationship there, with OpenAI, with Anthropic, whoever it is. And so, again, putting these things in the foundation, saying MCP is not just about Cloud Code, it's not just about Anthropic, having OpenAI there, it sends all these signals of, hey, this is safe for you to use. It's future proofed. It's going to be here for a long time. It's the foundation for agents going forward. You can come in with confidence. You can build on top of it. And those are the things that enterprises need right now in order to adopt with confidence. And then the last thing there is just what we've seen in terms of the rapid iteration around MCP. The best technology does not always win, but those that update really very quickly and continue to sort of listen to customer feedback and to go to where meet people where they are in the market, those almost always win.
As we all know, since its announcement, ACP adoption has been remarkable. More than 10,000 NCP servers and integrations across Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT, Cursor, VS Code, and others that we have seen. What does this level of standardization unlock for enterprises, especially around interoperability and building autonomous systems?
I think that it's going to be very interesting. I think that the 10,000 MCP servers is like not very interesting, to be honest. What's interesting is it github.com/MCP. Like, I think we're going to see this more and more, which is that all of these different SaaS providers will have an MCP endpoint. Maybe it's mcp.salesforce.com, or maybe it's /MCP, whatever it is. More and more, what you're going to see is that you've got a REST API and you've got an agent API. And that API will be MCP, and you'll provide it. You'll provide it in your products. You'll provide it in your services. Everything will come baked with MCP in it in some manner. In fact, right now, inside of Mirantis, we have an effort where we're looking into baking MCP servers into all of our products. We're basically doing that work right now. Our customers are asking for it. They want a way to connect their agents across all of our products. And so I think we're going to see basically two sets of MCP servers in the world going forward. There will be the set that vendors provide that will be either a service endpoint if it's a SaaS service, or it'll come, baked in some way with their products if it's a product that gets shipped to your site. And then there will be a set of MCP servers that are the ones that are custom made. So if you've got a financial services company, like we have a couple that we're working with right now, they don't want to build MCP servers for all of their vendors' products. They want their vendors to deliver MCP servers to them, and then they're busy building custom MCP servers that they're using internally that are about their businesses and their business processes and their data sets and the tools that they need. And that's where we're going to get to. So I think that you'll see a set of open source MCP servers, but more and more it'll be a de facto standard that vendors deliver as part of their offering, and it'll be customized, bespoke ones that are built for businesses based off of their own business needs. And that'll be the two parts of the world.
Now let's talk about other two components. Goose. Goose introduces a local first MCP integrated agent framework. Why is this local first approach so important for regulated, compliant, or security sensitive industries?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area where I'm highly skeptical. If by local we're talking about running MCP servers on your laptop. One of the things that MCP hasn't conquered yet that needs to be handled is that when you create agency for a system and it's working on your behalf, you want it to operate with your identity, right? It's not good if it's operating with its own identity. You need kind of what's called transitive identity. So it's doing something on your behalf, so it needs to identify as you. And so then we start to run into certain kinds of potential problems, which is that if I'm on a laptop and I want to run an MCP server locally, and I know this is going to go against how some people feel about it, um, that MCP server acting on my behalf, accessing internal resources, it should be identified using my identity. But now I've got this agent that I have little control over, from a from the security and compliance perspective, that's talking to local data sources, but then may also be talking to Gen AI systems, LLMs, that I don't control, or that I maybe haven't feel uncomfortable with giving authorization to that particular agent, which might not be vetted, to basically access those resources. So we have a problem. Agents running on a laptop calls a local MCP server. I have no control over that data flow. That MCP server calls a REST API to or a SQL interface, some kind of data set inside the enterprise, and I have little control over that. It looks like a real authentic call from that user, even though it's actually an agent that's autonomous. That agent is then calling an external LLM, and it may be sending data that I don't want it to that external LLM. So if I had one major critique of MCP, that is, is that it's been made too easy to kind of use that STDIO based approach for MCP servers. I think it's much better that MCP servers are run over HTTP, and then we can put them into centralized systems where we can apply governance and policy and have some way to get guardrails in place, and have some way to have some controls and compliance, especially in highly regulated industries. And so I think, it's kind of that same thing that happened with cloud in the early days, where there's a danger of kind of shadow IT in those early days. We've got a problem potentially with shadow agents in the short term. And I think it's very easy for people to get caught up in, how exciting it is that AI can do all these things for us and provide so much, automation capabilities that we never really had before. But it's also potentially very dangerous. I mean, data leakage of, very sensitive PII data, that could be a reputational hit that could be almost impossible to recover from. So, it's high reward, high risk this time around, and I think people need to keep that in mind.
And now let's talk about agents.md. It is becoming a canonical specification for agent workflow. How do you expect this to influence developer workflow inside large enterprises?
I mean, this is one of the pieces I'm sort of probably the most skeptical about. At least with Goose, we've got these stories from Block about, how they leveraged it internally, and they're pretty compelling stories from the CEO of Block. So, you get that level of value out, and it's clear. Agents.md is tricky, right? Because what we're fundamentally talking about is something that's going to be put in the context of any agent. And if you've done any AI assisted coding, or if you've written your own agents, you know that managing context is everything. That's the key. And so it's hard for me to see that you would have this, standardized agents.md that works for everybody. Like, that's just hard for me to see. Now, that being said, I don't know it's actually being released yet because I haven't seen it. Maybe OpenAI has something going on there. I do think that it's good that all agents go to a standard place, agents.md, to get the context, but I can't imagine that the actual content in agents.md is something that could be standardized across all use cases. So I'm hoping that what we wind up seeing when it's released is maybe a little bit of kind of the merging of kind of what Anthropic did with skills, Cloud Code skills, and with kind of what OpenAI did around agents.md. Because, if you have a agents.md that is modularized, that is has a way to point to different skills. So right now, tools like Cloud Code and different agents can be fairly smart. So they've got a main context and they'll load from something like agents.md, and then they can be smart enough and reason through like pointers to additional data. So inside the agents.md, you can say, hey, if you're going to do Kubernetes, read this markdown file that has all the key Kubernetes commands you have, and then it will only load that file, that additional markdown file, into the context if it's going to take an action on Kubernetes. And that way you can manage the context window a little bit more tightly. You can make sub-agents work more effectively because then the sub-agent is loading skills or particular data that it needs into its context window as it's running, and you're not messing with the main context window of the main orchestration agent. So, really kind of the proof is in the pudding. I got to see how they actually put it together. But I'm hoping that it's done in a way that's sort of more guidelines for how to use agents MD and context most effectively. And my guess is that's probably what it winds up landing on, rather than sort of a universal one size fits all set of agent context.
In regulated and compliance driven environments, what gaps or risks still exist in today's AI tooling? And which of those does this foundation help mitigate, and which will take more time to mature, similar to what we have seen with Kubernetes?
There are a lot of parallels to the rise of cloud. I mean, it's not perfect, right? I mean, this is definitely a different thing. But one of the things that I think was interesting in the early cloud days was there was a lot of back and forth of like, people are going to go all public cloud, people are going to go all private cloud, people are going to go hybrid cloud. And, where it landed, which is pretty normal, is that people wound up using the right tool for the job. And there were, it was very clear, that people wanted to stop running their own Active Directory and their own email systems, right? I mean, what is the value to even a big bank of running their own server systems, right? I mean, that none of that provides any value to their business. If Microsoft's going to do it on your behalf and can provide you with the security guarantees that you need, then you're good to go. On the other hand, there were lots of workloads that are not leaving the bank. Right? They're not going to take their financial transactions and stick them out on Google, right? Visa's not moving off their mainframes anytime soon. That's just not the way the world works. So what we see is that these new technology waves come, and then people embrace them and figure out how to leverage them in ways that make sense for their business. And so I think we're kind of in the throes of that. But what people don't see, what they don't really understand, is that it is early, early, early days. They think they get a little bit confused because ChatGPT, had this like massive ramp up on the B2C side. And that's great. And I wish them well. But I care more about B2B. I care more about enterprise, and the value that needs to be pulled out of AI for enterprises is less about like helping their coders write code. It's less about their marketing people writing prose. It's about them taking the data that makes them special and getting leverage out of that. It might be customer data. It might be the way they do customer support, whatever they hang their hat on, right? MBA teams have an identity. If you're in financial services, you have an identity within financial services. This is what we do. This is what we're great at. This is how we're differentiated. If you aren't applying AI into that area, then you're not getting out ahead of your competitors. And the reality is that we haven't even begun that phase. People are still, you talk about crawl, walk, run. Everybody's still in the crawl phase. We're just nudging up to kind of the walk phase. We're not even there yet. People are just figuring out like how to, train agentic engineers. They've done the basic around RAG and chatbots. And so, the gap is a gap in understanding, a gap in, being able to identify the workloads and the places to get leverage and competitive advantage. Like, people don't know what that is yet, right? I mean, if you go and you look at a lot of the financial services companies today, Many of them, even though these are highly regulated industries, many of them run a lot of their workloads on the cloud now. They have very specific use cases where it made sense, and much of their workloads do not. They still have pets workloads, they have cattle workloads. I mean, it is all over the place, and it is based off of need. And the problem is that we have not figured out yet, because it's early days, what should be AI transformed. Where should agents be deployed? What are the best practices for deploying agents? How do I protect my data? How do I have guarantees against hallucinations? How do I make sure there's no PII data leakage? When do I use an internal on-prem open source or open weight LLM? When do I use one off-prem? How do I have guarantees about when things are being used, whether it's on-prem or off-prem? How do I look at a more complex agentic workflow and measure it? How do I deploy evaluations and know its performance, right? In the past, we had A/B testing with websites. You do A/B testing, you can look at it, you can say, okay, this one increased transactions per second by this amount. The web page is loaded this much faster. Da 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 da. Doing that with agents is much, much harder. It's much more subjective, right? How you measure and evaluate performance and accuracy is very different. All of that stuff is very nascent. And that doesn't even go on to some of the hardest problems, which are like, how do you make your data clean? How do you do data labeling? How do you make sure that, with an AI system, it's garbage in, garbage out? What's the best way to handle things? Do you take, existing models and fine tune them? Do you deploy RAG? Do you do some combination? Do you train your own models in some instances where you've got a specialized use case? Maybe it's not large language model. Maybe it's a small vision model because you've got a problem where you've got to do things with CCTVs. I mean, all of that stuff is completely nascent. We're at the very beginning, and people are not going to figure it out except the way that they always have, which is trial and error. And I hate to say it because people always want to find some shortcut, but the reality is that it's always been trial and error. It always will be trial and error, because there's just times where you don't know what you don't know until you go through the process. And this is why I sort of encourage people to kind of come in and be involved with something like the foundation, the new Agentic AI Foundation, because it is by being in that group of people where people are doing their experiments where the value of the community really comes through, because then you're talking to the other financial services or healthcare or construction companies or whomever that are around the table, and they're all trying experiments, and then you're learning from each other what's working for you, what's not working for me, and you're trading that information at the same time that you're working together around open source in that ecosystem. That learning, that's what gets us through, right? So we've got to compete, but we've also got to cooperate, because we need those set of best practices. We need the set of patterns that work with agents and AI so that we can all be successful.
Now let's talk about Mirantis. You folks have deep roots in open source infrastructure, all the way from OpenStack to today's Kubernetes. Given the opportunities emerging around agentic AI, where do you see Mirantis contributing to or leveraging this new open ecosystem?
So we have a lot of different ways that we're looking at this. So obviously, in the past, we've been more of an open source infrastructure company, and we're still doing a bunch there. We've got some really exciting things that we'll be announcing over the course of next year. And that's still sort of a major piece of what we're working on. Another kind of big piece of what we're working on is trying to figure out how to go with our existing customers on their agentic journey, particularly around our products. As I said, we're looking at providing MCP capability across the entire product portfolio. Our customers are already looking into ways to basically deploy agents. A lot of their concerns tend to be around operations, not software development. This is an area where agents haven't been deployed very successfully yet. You see a runaway train around development, but not so much around doing operations, especially on Kubernetes. We think that customers want to figure out how to get operational leverage. One of the things that's very interesting historically is that operators are overworked and just in a position where they spend so much time firefighting, collecting data, dealing with outages, doing root cause analysis. These are all things that actually agents can provide immense value for. And I think then operators can be focused on the thing that makes them special, which is being experts on their own business processes and systems, and then they're orchestrating agents to basically help them. So it's more like an operator is kind of puppet master who basically has agents working on their behalf to help them do root cause analysis and correlation and figure out what's going on with different products and problems in production. And that's a whole area that's nascent where I think people can get a lot of leverage. We're working with our existing customers around that to help them in that area. And then last but not least, we have some aspirations to go up the stack a little bit. We still are fundamentally an open source kind of infrastructure company, but we have kind of gone up the stack a little bit at a time every time, from OpenStack, which was infrastructure as a service, to Kubernetes, which is containers, infrastructure for containers. And we have intentions to go up and provide infrastructure for agents. That's something that myself and my team are working actively on. We think it's really early. We've seen a lot of people placing bets on products already for agent infrastructure, and we think it's far too early to deploy a product. So we're not doing that. Instead, we're leading with services, as we did with OpenStack, as we did with Cloud Native and Kubernetes. That's why we announced our MCP Adaptive Ops services offering. I'm going to be dropping new information on that this week or next. I got a data sheet of all of our services, an explanation of our agentic maturity model, and how we help people develop agents and MCP servers. We've been doing that inside the business for over a year now. We've been doing that for some of our customers. So we've done a ton of learning about what works and what doesn't work. And we're going to help enterprises cross the AI chasm by providing, kind of baked blueprints, open source blueprints that basically help people deploy and manage agents and MCP servers in a secure way in production with high levels of confidence. And I've got a whole bunch of announcements that'll be coming out over the next few months in that regard.
Randy, thank you so much for joining me and sharing these insights. It's quite clear that Agentic AI and the work happening around MCP, Goose, and agents.md, more will join the foundation, is setting the foundation for how enterprises will build trustworthy, interoperable, and scalable AI systems in the years ahead. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to your next discussion.
Pleasure always, Swap.